The alarm screamed at 5:30 a.m., just as it had for the past 3 years. Kalen Voss slammed the snooze button with the same mechanical precision that defined his entire existence. 28 years old, trapped in a gray cubicle at Meridian Industries, he had become a ghost of his former dreams. The ambitious young man who once spoke of changing the world now struggled to change his own bedsheets. His reflection in the bathroom mirror told a story of surrender. Dark circles framed bloodshot eyes, and his once athletic frame had softened into the shape of defeat. The suit he wore was wrinkled, much like his spirit. Every morning brought the same internal dialogue. Tomorrow I'll start working out. Tomorrow I'll eat better. Tomorrow I'll begin that side business. Tomorrow had become his favorite lie. The commute to work was a 40-minute meditation on mediocrity. Surrounded by other passengers who wore the same expression of quiet desperation, Kalen watched his city blur past through rain-streaked windows. His phone buzzed with notifications from social media, where former classmates posted about promotions, marathons, and adventures. Each post felt like a small dagger, reminding him of the gap between where he was and where he could have been. At work, his manager, Mrs. Verlin, called him into her office. The conversation was brief, but devastating. Budget cuts meant layoffs, and Kellen's position was being eliminated. 30 days' notice. 3 years of loyal service, reduced to a manila envelope containing his severance package and a generic thank you letter. Walking back to his desk in stunned silence, something inside Kalen shifted. Not the dramatic transformation of movie scenes, but something quieter and more profound. He looked around the office at colleagues who seemed more dead than alive, at the flickering fluorescent lights that had witnessed thousands of unfulfilled dreams, at the inspirational posters that mocked everyone with their hollow promises. That evening, instead of drowning his sorrows in takeout and television, Kalen sat at his kitchen table with a notebook. The page remained blank for nearly an hour, as he wrestled with a simple question. Who was he without his job? Without his routine, without his excuses? The first words he wrote were brutally honest. I am afraid of failure, afraid of success, afraid of discovering he wasn't as special as he'd once believed. But beneath that fear, something else stirred, a ember of the person he used to be, the one who believed impossible was just another word for untested. He made a list of everything he'd been postponing: learning Spanish, starting a fitness routine, writing the novel that lived in his head, launching the consulting business he'd researched but never pursued, building genuine relationships instead of collecting social media connections. The list filled 3 pages. As midnight approached, Kalen made a decision that would define the next chapter of his life. No more tomorrow, no more excuses, no more waiting for the perfect moment, because perfect moments didn't exist, only moments, made perfect by action. He closed the notebook and walked to his bedroom, but not before stopping at his mirror once more. This time, he saw something different. Not the man he had become, but the shadow of the man he could be. The transformation wouldn't happen overnight, but it would begin at sunrise. The old Kalen died that night. What would emerge in the morning was still uncertain, but it would be authentic, and it would be unstoppable. Dawn broke with unusual clarity, as if the universe itself had conspired to mark Kellen's rebirth. At 5 a.m., 30 minutes earlier than his old alarm, he was already lacing up running shoes he'd bought 2 years ago, but never worn. The tags still hung from the laces, like badges of procrastination. The first run was humbling. What he'd imagined would be a triumphant journey around the neighborhood became a wheezing quarter-mile struggle that ended with him bent over a mailbox, questioning every life choice that had led to this moment. His lungs burned, his legs trembled, and doubt whispered seductively about returning to the comfort of his couch. But Kalen had made a pact with himself the night before, written in his notebook with the solemnity of a sacred vow. Comfort is the enemy of growth. He walked the remaining distance home, but he finished the route, Day 1 was complete. The real test came in the following weeks. His severance package provided a buffer, but it also removed the external structure that had governed his life. Without the forced routine of commuting to Meridian Industries, Kalen faced the terrifying freedom of empty hours. This was where most people failed, in the space between intention and habit, where motivation went to die. He divided his days into blocks, treating unemployment like the full-time job of rebuilding himself. Morning runs became non-negotiable, even when rain turned the streets into rivers, and his muscles screamed for mercy. Each day he pushed a little further, adding one more block to his route, one more minute to his endurance. The physical transformation catalyzed mental changes. Clearer thinking followed improved fitness. The fog that had clouded his decision-making for years began to lift, revealing possibilities he'd forgotten existed. He devoured books on psychology, business strategy, and personal development, not as escapism, but as ammunition for the war against his former self. Morvaden Cricks, a former colleague who had left Meridian to start his own consulting firm, reached out after hearing about the layoffs. Over coffee, Morvaden shared his own transformation story, how losing his job 3 years earlier had been the catalyst for building something he actually loved. "The market doesn't need another employee," he said, stirring his espresso with deliberate precision, "but it desperately needs people who've done the inner work." The phrase echoed in Kellen's mind. Inner work. It wasn't about positive thinking or vision boards. It was about excavating the person he'd buried under years of compromise and fear. Every morning run became an archaeological dig, uncovering layers of his authentic self that had been fossilized by routine. He began documenting his progress, not in feel-good platitudes, but in measurable metrics. Miles run, books read, skills learned, habits installed. The data became his mirror, reflecting changes that were invisible day to day but undeniable week-to-week. The Spanish lessons he started felt clumsy at first, his tongue stumbling over unfamiliar sounds, but language learning became a metaphor for his entire transformation. The willingness to sound foolish while becoming fluent in a new version of himself. Friends and family noticed the changes, though their reactions varied. Some offered encouragement, others expressed skepticism disguised as concern. "Don't you think you're being a bit extreme?" his sister Lirelei asked during a family dinner. "Maybe you should just focus on finding another job." But Kalen had learned to distinguish between care and comfort. Care challenged him to grow. Comfort invited him to shrink. He smiled at his sister's worry, while silently recommitting to his path. By the end of his second month of unemployment, Kalen had run over 100 miles, read 12 books, and completed an online course in digital marketing. More importantly, he had proven to himself that discipline wasn't a personality trait you were born with. It was a skill you developed through consistent practice. The foundation was set. Now it was time to build. 3 months into his transformation, Kalen faced his first real test. His savings were dwindling, and the pressure to find any job grew from whispers to screams. Family dinners became intervention sessions, with relatives taking turns explaining why his sabbatical had gone on long enough. The old Kalen would have caved, accepting the first offer that promised a steady paycheck and benefits. Instead, he doubled down, using skills from his digital marketing course. Kalen began building his consulting practice from his one-bedroom apartment, his specialty, helping struggling businesses optimize their operations. The same work he'd done at Meridian, but without the soul-crushing bureaucracy. The irony wasn't lost on him that getting fired had freed him to do his best work. His first client was Riven Soltar, who owned a family restaurant that was bleeding money despite serving exceptional food. Traditional consultants had quoted fees that would have bankrupted the struggling business. Kalen offered something different, results-based pricing. He would implement changes for free, earning payment only when revenue increased. The arrangement terrified him, which he had learned was usually a sign he was moving in the right direction. working 18-hour days. Kalin immersed himself in every aspect of Riven's business. He waited tables to understand customer flow, spent mornings with suppliers to negotiate better deals, and stayed late, analyzing data that previous consultants had ignored. The work was exhausting, but it felt alive in a way his corporate job never had. The breakthrough came during his 4th week at the restaurant. While reviewing customer feedback, Kalin noticed a pattern. People loved the food, but felt the atmosphere was stale. The solution wasn't complex. Rearranging seating, updating lighting, and training staff to engage differently with customers. Small changes that cost almost nothing but transformed the entire experience. Within 60 days, the restaurant's revenue had increased by 35%. Riven paid Kalin more than he'd made in 3 months at Meridian Industries, but the real reward was deeper. He had created tangible value in the world. Word spread through the tight-knit business community. Kalin's phone began ringing with inquiries from other struggling enterprises. Each project taught him something new, not just about business, but about his own capabilities. He was discovering talents that had been dormant during his corporate years, skills that only emerged when he stopped playing it safe. But success brought its own challenges. The old Kalin would have celebrated by relaxing his standards, allowing discipline to slip in the glow of achievement. The new Kalin understood that success was a test of character, not a reward for it. He maintained his morning runs, even when client work kept him up past midnight. He continued learning Spanish even when his schedule seemed impossible. He kept reading, kept growing, kept pushing against the comfortable boundaries that success often creates. The physical transformation was now undeniable. 20 pounds lighter, with muscle definition he hadn't seen since college, Kalin looked like a different person. But the mental transformation was even more profound. He thought differently, made decisions differently, related to challenges differently. Problems that once seemed insurmountable now appeared as puzzles to solve. His relationship with failure evolved too. When a potential client rejected his proposal, instead of spiraling into self-doubt, he analyzed what he could improve. When a project didn't deliver expected results, he studied the disconnect between intention and outcome. Failure became data, not identity. Late one evening, while reviewing financial projections for his growing practice, Kalin realized he was earning more than he ever had as an employee. But money wasn't the real measurement of success. It was the daily evidence that he was becoming the person he'd always had the potential to be. The crucible was testing him daily, but he was emerging stronger, more refined, more authentically himself. The hardest part of the journey wasn't behind him, it was integrated into him. He had learned to find strength in struggle, growth in discomfort, and purpose in the process itself. 6 months after his termination from Meridian Industries, Kalin's life bore no resemblance to his former existence. His consulting practice had grown to 5 regular clients, each representing a different industry and challenge. More importantly, he had become someone his old self wouldn't recognize, disciplined without being rigid, ambitious without being desperate, confident without being arrogant. The morning routine that had once felt like torture now felt like meditation. His runs had evolved from desperate gasps around the block to contemplative 5-mile journeys through the city's awakening streets. During these runs, his best ideas emerged, solutions to client problems, insights about human nature, and visions for expanding his impact. It was during one of these morning runs that he encountered Zimra Cade, a woman whose own transformation journey would prove pivotal to his continued growth. She was training for her 3rd marathon, having started running only 2 years earlier to cope with a devastating divorce. Their conversation, initially just runners' small talk, revealed kindred spirits who understood that physical challenges were really mental training. Most people think discipline is about restriction, Zamara said as they cooled down near the park fountain. But I've learned it's actually about expansion. Every limit you push through in one area expands your capacity in all areas. Their friendship developed through shared morning runs and conversations that explored the intersection of personal development and practical achievement. Zimura worked in corporate training, helping companies develop leadership programs. She had been watching Kellen's transformation with professional interest. "You've stumbled onto something powerful," she told him one morning. "Your clients aren't just hiring you to fix their businesses, they're learning from watching how you approach problems. You're teaching transformation by modeling it." The observation sparked an idea that would define the next phase of Kellen's evolution. What if he could systematize his transformation process and teach it to others? Not as abstract motivational speaking, but as practical methodology that produced measurable results. He began documenting every aspect of his journey, the specific habits he'd installed, the mental frameworks he'd developed, the progression of challenges he'd conquered. The result was a comprehensive system he called upgrade protocols. Actionable steps for anyone wanting to remake themselves without excuses. His first workshop was held in a rented community center room with 12 attendees, mostly friends of friends who had heard about his transformation. The format was radically different from typical self-help seminars. Instead of inspirational speeches, Kalen led participants through practical exercises. Instead of promises about overnight change, he taught sustainable systems for gradual, but inevitable improvement. The results were immediate and powerful. Participants didn't just leave feeling motivated, they left with specific daily practices and accountability structures. Within 30 days, every participant had made measurable progress toward their stated goals. Word spread through social media and professional networks. The second workshop had a waiting list. The third was held in a hotel conference room with 45 participants from 3 different cities. Kalen found himself at the center of a movement he had accidentally started, people who were tired of excuses and ready for authentic change. But success brought its own temptations. Speaking fees increased, and opportunities multiplied faster than he could evaluate them. The old Kalen would have said yes to everything, afraid that declining opportunities meant missing out. The new Kalen had learned to say no to good opportunities, so he could say yes to great ones. He maintained his client consulting work, recognizing that staying connected to real-world business challenges kept his teaching grounded in practical reality. He continued his personal disciplines, understanding that his credibility came not from past achievements, but from ongoing growth. The most profound change wasn't in his bank account or his reputation, it was in his sense of identity. He had moved from being someone who wanted to change to someone who embodied change as a way of life. The transformation wasn't a destination he had reached, it was a process he had mastered. Late one evening, while preparing materials for his next workshop, Kalen reflected on the journey that had brought him to this point. 6 months earlier, he had been a victim of circumstances. Now he was an architect of possibilities, both for himself and for others, ready to upgrade their lives without excuses. The multiplier effect was in full motion. His transformation had become a catalyst for others' transformations, creating ripples that extended far beyond his original intentions. Success, Kalen discovered, created its own form of resistance. As his workshops gained popularity and his reputation grew, he faced challenges that tested his commitment in ways unemployment never had. The comfortable trap of expertise began to close around him, threatening to turn his transformation journey into just another career. The first sign of trouble came during his 5th workshop series. Participants were achieving remarkable results, average fitness improvements of 20%. Career advancement rates triple the national average, and relationship satisfaction scores that impressed even skeptical researchers. But Kalen noticed something troubling in himself. He was starting to believe his own publicity. Articles in business magazines praised his revolutionary approach to personal development. Speaking requests came from Fortune 500 companies willing to pay fees that dwarfed his consulting income. Social media followers multiplied daily, hanging on his every posted insight. The attention was intoxicating, and intoxication was always dangerous for someone committed to clear thinking. The wake-up call came from an unexpected source. Drazik Wayne, a participant from his third workshop, reached out 6 months after completing the program. Instead of sharing success stories, Drazik confessed he had relapsed into old patterns after an initial burst of progress. The first month was incredible, Drazik explained during their coffee meeting. I felt like I could conquer anything. But then real life hit. Stress at work, problems at home, financial pressure. All those tools you taught us, they just stopped working. Kellen's first instinct was to explain what Drazik had done wrong, to defend his methodology by highlighting the participants who had sustained their changes. But he caught himself. That response came from ego, not truth. The more important question was, what could he learn from Drazik's experience? The conversation led to a sobering realization. Kalen had been teaching transformation as if it were linear, a series of steps that, once mastered, guaranteed permanent change. But his own journey had been anything but linear. He had faced setbacks, moments of doubt, periods where discipline felt impossible. His success came not from never falling, but from developing systems for getting back up. He spent the next month reaching out to all his former workshop participants, conducting what he called reality audits. The results were humbling. While many had maintained their progress, a significant percentage had experienced setbacks they were too embarrassed to discuss. They had internalized failure as personal weakness rather than understanding it as part of the transformation process. This insight forced Kalen to confront his own recent patterns. In the glow of external success, had he started taking shortcuts with his personal disciplines? Was he maintaining his morning runs, his learning schedule, his commitment to continuous growth? An honest inventory revealed troubling gaps. Success had made him complacent in subtle but dangerous ways. The recognition sparked what he called his second transformation, upgrading his upgraded self. He redesigned his entire approach, both personally and professionally. Instead of presenting transformation as conquest, he began teaching it as cultivation. Instead of promising permanent change, he emphasized perpetual change. His workshops evolved to include modules on handling setbacks, maintaining momentum through difficult periods, and distinguishing between temporary defeats and permanent failures. He shared his own struggles openly, modeling vulnerability alongside strength. The new approach resonated even more powerfully than his original methodology. Participants felt permission to be human while pursuing excellence. They learned to see challenges as confirmation they were growing, not evidence they were failing. Kalen also restructured his business model. Instead of one-time workshops, he created ongoing support communities where participants could share struggles and celebrate victories together. He limited his speaking engagements to focus on depth rather than breadth, working more intensively with fewer people. The financial impact was initially negative. Turning down lucrative opportunities meant lower short-term income, but the long-term results proved the wisdom of the decision. Participants achieved higher success rates, testimonials became more authentic, and referrals increased as people experienced genuine transformation rather than temporary motivation. Most importantly, Kalen rediscovered the humility that had fueled his initial transformation. He wasn't a guru who had figured everything out. He was a fellow traveler who had learned some useful navigation skills. That perspective kept him growing, kept him honest, and kept him effective. The resistance he faced wasn't external opposition to his success. It was the internal temptation to stop growing once he had achieved external validation. Recognizing and overcoming that resistance became another upgrade, another evolution in his endless journey of becoming. 2 years after that pivotal morning, when he laced up forgotten running shoes, Kalen stood before an audience of 500 business leaders at the Global Leadership Summit. But this wasn't the triumphant conclusion to a transformation story. It was evidence that real transformation never concluded, only deepened and expanded. His presentation wasn't about his success, but about a principle he called infinite upgrading, the recognition that personal development wasn't a problem to solve but a capacity to strengthen. He shared the stage not as an expert who had arrived, but as a practitioner who had learned to love the journey itself. The most dangerous moment in any transformation, he told the audience, is when you start believing you've transformed enough. In the past 6 months, Kalin had faced his most challenging test yet. His father, Torvin Voss, had been diagnosed with early-stage Alzheimer's disease. The diagnosis shattered Kalin's carefully constructed routines and forced him to confront the reality that some challenges couldn't be overcome through discipline and determination alone. The old Kalin would have either ignored the situation, focusing obsessively on work to avoid emotional pain, or become completely overwhelmed, abandoning all personal disciplines while drowning in helplessness. The current version of himself did neither. Instead, he applied his transformation principles to a situation that demanded both acceptance and action. He restructured his life again, this time to become his father's primary caregiver while maintaining his business commitments. Morning runs became morning walks with Torvin, their conversations shifting from business strategies to family memories. The Spanish lessons continued, but now included teaching basic phrases to his father, who delighted in learning something new despite his diagnosis. This experience taught Kalin that transformation wasn't about building an invulnerable version of yourself. It was about developing the flexibility and resilience to remain authentic under any circumstances. Strength wasn't the absence of vulnerability. It was grace under pressure. His business evolved accordingly. The upgrade protocols now included modules on handling life's uncontrollable elements, finding growth opportunities within constraints, and maintaining personal development during crisis periods. His workshops became deeper, more nuanced, more real. Zimro Cade had become his business partner, bringing her corporate training expertise to their expanding organization. Together, they had created something unprecedented, a scalable system for sustainable personal transformation that acknowledged both human potential and human limitations. Their client base had evolved beyond individual workshop participants to include Fortune 500 companies implementing organization-wide transformation initiatives. But the principles remained the same. Authentic change happened through consistent daily practices, honest self-assessment, and the courage to keep growing when growth became uncomfortable. The financial success had exceeded Kalin's wildest projections from his cubicle days, but money had become a byproduct rather than a goal. His real wealth was measured in different metrics: the thousands of people who had genuinely transformed their lives, the businesses that had become more human while becoming more profitable, and the growing community of people committed to continuous upgrade. On quiet Sunday mornings, Kalin would still sit with his notebook, the same one he had opened on that desperate night 2 years earlier. The questions had evolved, but the practice remained. Who am I becoming? What am I avoiding? Where can I grow next? His father's condition was progressing, creating new challenges that would test everything Kalin had learned about adaptation and acceptance. His business faced scaling challenges that required new skills and perspectives. His relationship with Zimra was deepening into something that might become love, bringing its own opportunities for growth and vulnerability. Each challenge was another invitation to upgrade, another chance to discover what he was capable of becoming. The scared, stuck man who had been laid off from Meridian Industries was gone, but not because he had been replaced by someone else. He had evolved into a fuller, more authentic version of himself, someone who faced life's uncertainties with curiosity rather than fear. Standing before that summit audience, Kalin realized the most important lesson of his journey: transformation wasn't about becoming someone different. It was about becoming who you had always been, beneath the layers of compromise, fear, And excuses? Upgrade yourself. He concluded his presentation, echoing the principle that had guided his journey. Not because you're broken, but because you're infinite. Not because you have to, but because you can. And definitely, absolutely, with no excuses. The applause was enthusiastic, but Kalen was already thinking about tomorrow's challenges, tomorrow's opportunities to grow, tomorrow's chances to upgrade. The journey continued. And that was exactly as it should be. His transformation had become a way of life, and his life had become a demonstration that ordinary people could achieve extraordinary things, not through magic or luck, but through the simple, profound decision to stop making excuses and start making progress. The story would continue as long as he was alive to write it.